Alright, that was Kasa Garshivarela Neda, Zugi Sim Chicken, and Dungayoaki, Seti Dare, Kiawa Chimale Nere, and Jik Dungayoaki, Karachilium, Karasungore Lamna, Tatu Cha, Kondro, Maya, Marikpa, and Jik Denegi, and Tesum Lokshe, Loktala Sopa, Denella Dene, that is Chazam Kundo. Desoyer Mazuki Kiadu, Digi Kienjene, not Anhazuki, Sedele, Anhazuki Sim, Mike Chick Sim, Latin Ski, or the Makiwa Chada, Rashinikala Dunga, Young Gores, and the Delatine, and the Lang Basan, and the Lady Table Mohobana, and the Jinga to Dunga, the two in the Young Gores, Jazan Dinga, the Kangal Jagada, Rashinikala, and the Kangai Jakangi, and the same details. That is so young, Gansungur said that Gudan Kim Mebalama, Gudan Kinchilla, Shangela, Twin to Gores. She's done Gudan Kin, Shangela, Twin to Bana, and Zawakar, Twin to Gorilla, and Dinsen Marikpa, Satella, and Delatin Gores. She's not a Yomo Beric, Zavi Yonsa Chazadi, Dinsen Marik says. She's not yet Hamje, the deep Bangba, deep Bangu Gores, that the Yomo Beric, Sabona Jeba, Zawane Bangba de la Bangu. And Denzi Marik by the Bangu Gores. That Denzi Marik by the Canas Bangu Lamna and Dematubazi said, Denzi said, you the Kanlama round when you tuba Zindu Gores, the Denzi. Chesanda, the doctor, you Kanlama round when you do Tongbani, the dog Gores, Tongbani Tone, the new Tongbani Topu Lodi, Gombala Tene, and the Nigin Yomo, Sabin Basha, the Java Bangu Gores, and the San Yuchimendiki, and the Casa. Kundo Tamche Bangway Tondala, Tony Dusi Demba, Tony Dusi Dembare said, Dongbany Topolo de Padusi said, Monty Pangazuliadus, Lambden to Snavare, said Danganzuki, Yamlen Geoguadi, Dongbany Topolo de Yamlen Geogures, Chesanomo Bata, Yomo Becutis in Basha, the Jeva Bongbala, Dongbany Topolo de Yamlen Geogures, said Kazadan the Digo Shivare.
Good morning. So last night we looked at a verse from Nagarjuna. And the meaning of this verse at the top of page 20 is that we need to come to recognize or understand what is meant by suffering, the suffering that we all yearn to be freed from. And suffering is experienced through the arisal of afflictions. Afflictions such as attachment, anger, wrong views, ignorance, pride, jealousy, and so forth. As in this verse, referred to as misconceptions. From their arisal, our state of our peace of mind is lost. Any happiness we're experiencing is lost. And in particular, as as stronger afflictions arise, our mind becomes ever more disturbed, uptight. And then, not only now are we suffering, but through the expression of these afflictions, whether through a mere facial expression, through verbal communication or physical behavior, suffering is brought to others. And this expression of or experience of suffering is short-term, but it also leads to the accumulation of karma, which is contaminated by these afflictions, and where it is non-virtuous, it will lead to suffering in our future lives. This is an absolutely crucial point to understand in the Dharma, because it presents the central, the foundational role our minds play in our suffering, in all our pain and misery. Recognizing this, one will seek out why this process is coming about, and we will recognize that all these afflictions are dependent arisings. They come about in dependence on a wide variety of causes. But whilst they have a wide variety of causes, they all share one root, the ignorance of true grasping. And when we reflect deeply and gain conviction that this is the case, the determination to find out more about this will arise. Because with knowledge, we are empowered. With knowledge, we can do something about our situation. We are not helpless. Our situation is not hopeless. With knowledge and with skillful guidance, we can not only recognize the root cause of suffering, but we can learn what we can do about this. Here we come to understand not just that the root cause is the ignorance of true grasping, but we need to understand what true existence is. We come to recognize that phenomena appear to consciousness as being truly existent, as being independent, not requiring anything else at all, not being influenced by anything at all, because they are independent of other. And then a consciousness grasps at this appearance, believing phenomena exist in the way they appear. And this consciousness is contrary to how phenomena exist. Phenomena do not exist truly. They do not exist by way of their own nature. And therefore, not being in accordance with reality, it's an ignorance. This ignorance can be eradicated through developing the completely opposite mind, because two contradictory minds cannot abide together. And the contrary mind to this ignorance is a wisdom, and in particular, it's a wisdom realizing emptiness, the emptiness of true existence. And it's therefore, looking at the verse, it's for this purpose of abandoning all misconceptions, all afflictions, that the nectar of emptiness was taught by the Buddha. Again, as shown last night, this particular term, taught, has the additional meaning of not a mere verbal bestowing of information, but an illumination of that information, a showing how to utilize that information. So the Buddha not only imparted information, but he guided his students in how to integrate that within themselves and thereby gain freedom.
And in it, ngajile that jige dingi dewa nyomoba ganga tamje shini shidi yabo yonala dang jige dinigi nyomoba riktradi bangu gorba di bangba tomba yete lokomchene bangu riese sungor che dini za dang jige da dinane somada chasada sanyi ge sung garo somada jig lamrim nalo somba ne da jig donala so gyina somada chasada jige nyomoba rikpaya na di pangwala tombangi to lo de komchen bangu riese de ta payagi nyembo zo tombangi to lo de riese de ta jung chasan na sonye donda nyimbo dire ta dinanma ta donanma sonje ge shirsin ge dona sonje ge donda nyimbo de pasu dyishin tombangi to lo komkores di nyimbo dyishin ma sungor wa dinane.
And everything the Buddha taught, whether in the sutras or tantras, as well as all the commentarial material such as found in the Lamrim, is focused on the achievement of this goal, the goal of achieving lasting stable happiness, a peace of mind that is never lost. And such a state of mind is attained through the complete elimination, the abandonment of the afflictions together with their seeds. So all the sutras, tantras, and commentarial texts are focused on how to eradicate the afflictions through the cultivation of the wisdom that realizes emptiness.
Di tuenen donda jeba chetang samdang na du dianti dianjian zhawa zhungwa ane samdang de jeba chetang donda jeba che pa shimju daksa cheche ane pa shimju cheche do uri su korwa da.
And the technique to cultivate this wisdom that realizes emptiness within our own continuum, is to hear teachings, to reflect and later meditate on them. And the key points here are to gather knowledge through hearing, and whilst doing so, think for ourselves. Think for ourselves, is this correct or not? To reflect deeply on the meaning, and in this way, integrate it within ourselves.
지사 동의 도바들라 다 지가 저기 제바 심주 파치도 샘디 파 제지도 니에지 파 지 심주 파 샘 샨다 남야 다 말아 삼마다지 네 가르 제바 chen 딜레 미수 가르친 파 삼델다지 제바 제고레스 우로와다 제바 제고레스 지상 셈 지게 동반이 삼다데 갑래 아직 삼라다 마라다 아직 내가 삼다 소수의 분연게 선자 지게 생경할 뉴욕에서 삼다 아니 샬레 판도지에 삼다 되네게 삼다에는 근데 지당 디수션라 판도지에 삼도 야고래 이네 동반이를 제바 지비갑을 디수 삼다는 남면로지 자루고 가서 셈이엔로 지상 디 동반이 또베 다다 레투고마 되네 장한 저기 대체상 실신 86년에 시도 되는 신의 주고를 해서 딩에서 신의 고고를 했어도 다치사 동반이 또 발아야 셈 남이야 먹으면 상승면 가지 고 가르쳐 받은 대랑 미수가지 대랑 삼다 미수가지 받아야 고고래 근데 또 차바이네 대래 제주도니 딩에서 주고자 신의 주고자 되는 자다 신의 고고를 해서 신의 주고를 송고로 봐
The process then of realizing emptiness comes through hearing teachings, reflecting, analyzing, investigating, so really thinking for ourselves based on what we're hearing in the teachings, reading in text, and our own experience, what we ourselves have experienced and what we've observed, coming to see the validity, the truth of the teachings for ourselves. But to be able to actually do that, to actually gain a transformative experience of emptiness, takes a concerted effort of a sustained period, abandoning all inner distractions. Because right now, our mind tends to be dominated by objects of attachment, friends, family, as well as those that bring harm to them, all our enemies and those that we dislike. Our mind is swayed continuously by this inner conflict, this inner distraction. And as long as we remain in such a state, we will not be able to realize emptiness. And in terms of the sequence of the 6 perfections, there is a reason that a perfection of wisdom is the 6th of the perfections, and it immediately follows that of the perfection of concentration. In order to realize emptiness, one has to develop our concentration through weakening our distractions. So concentration is essential for realizing emptiness.
지산다 되니기 딩게진 신년 주야다 안에 지게 동방연의 제바체기 된디게 남자 삼당발라 되니기 로변 제발라 디 제가 되니기 듬바 하고 싶어거든 되니기 듬바면은 안에 딩게진 주고 말에 안에 지게 제바체 되지다 대 가신 주신 안에 될야 디 로변 제기세베 되니기 듬바 싶고 그래 디인자 전주님는 고그래 세 전주기 디스동 숨고로 봐
Realizing emptiness requires the prior development of concentration. To develop concentration, just like with the realization of emptiness, this is not easy and requires a strong determination, a deep aspiration to achieve these realizations. And with a strength of mind determined to develop single point of concentration so that one then can realize emptiness, one requires joyous perseverance. The mind, the attitude that takes delight in persevering in the cultivation of virtue. This is indispensable in order to cultivate single points of concentration and later realize emptiness.
되니기 동역이 듬바 계제 되니기 제도 갑라 내 강아 망불리기 레세고로 받아 제산 셈리아 강아 안지게 아지 어다디 신사 말에 셈피게 강아 안지게 간신나 안지게 류리아 강아 용고레 셈라 강아 용고레 안 류심니가라 강아 용고레 데델야 안생기 직 발셰다 되네 망고 용시기레스 제가 되네자 제차산 세워 공부레스 제가 세비 최 냠내자라 강아 게되다 세버 공부하던 아다 강아도 다시 수사말 샤샤고서 지샤기로 와 샤샤로 와 안디자다 아직 세버 공부하던 미생기 발시 아다디 발시지고 다디 냠내진데 발시시면 딜레 샤샤고서 베시 용구로 와 제자다 류기 강아 셈제 강아 쟁기다 네비기 된디게 발시용도 갑라 델야 안 세버 공부 고르 세비 냠는 고르레스 제자데 세비 냠는 고르 세바 세바 숨고로 와
In the sequence of training, what is clear for those even thinking about it, let alone those who have experience of trying, one does encounter so many obstacles, so many problems. The source of those, the experience of those, or the experience of those will be inner. We experience our difficulties in our consciousness. And they may come about through a way of thinking. They may also be influenced by external outer conditions, our physical state, our body. But the experience is mental. And therefore, we need to develop the skill of patience. Patience is a mind that stays undisturbed by whatever it encounters. Whatever obstacle we encounter, primarily there will be inner, but there will also sometimes be outer, that these don't overwhelm us. When one's skilled with the practice of patience, these, whatever one encounters, do not overwhelm one's mind, and not due to a sense of obligation or determination, but with a lightness, with a joy. One recognizes that whatever obstacle one encounters, this can be dealt with. It's not insurmountable, and with skill can be overcome. Such an attitude is the attitude of patience.
samlo ngamba tiki pa kaso lu cheba ngamba tiki pa pango gores na de shin lu yu gone shanlia kuma ko ne ba cheba cheba ina andigi yang chi namya da ka social ya ka ra shin ni ka nga mong ji de ne chi ke se ga so re a julie chi ke se ba ko mi na pa she da din dun ba zhen zhui nyam ne che la pa shi shi li wa je lu nga yi su mi ko ne shanlia ne bi ke jawa da de ne mong bo le de dile de ne an ra wa me ba rang la ka nga shanlia ka nga li go de ne sa 저 류가 있으면 예제되면 수림 송샤바이나 되는 향기 셈기 토네 샬란데바 지금에서 삼로 소바이나 니 토네 배 나서 바샤 먹고지 가르고 그래서 지난 디네자 나 나게 거네 류주거네 대서 파 송바이나 되니게 류가 있으면 예제 파 dom제 수림 야고 송바이나 안 달라테네 강아 먹고지 세르고 그래서 디네자 내가 지금 쇠변 냠는 제야이나다 전주 좀야 이나 차상한테 야고용도 이제서 수림 야고 냠는 제고래 해야지 다 되네 수림 냠는 되시고 지상한 저기 윤된 가래로 좀 제배나 다 신의 주변다 되네 토도 수림 야고 류가 있음기다 류가 요거네 한지 샹을 깨지 망고시 전여바 제바나 니기 강아 니지게 류유거네 샹르녀바 제바다 되네 신의 시디 호강아 셈비토네 자마라선 샹르녀베 삼로전 자와 먹고 좀 남에 지내 신의 주변다 대설에 준비 좀 해야야 아니 바시 침부지고 대자당아 저기 추림사 되게 침부시고래 저 추림 송고래 지네 언도스네 추림 냠는 제 리고로 봐.
In order to actually be able to give rise to this sequence of training, an indispensable foundation of ethics is required. This foundation is indispensable for the attainment of all good qualities. If we aspire to develop the good quality of being a patient person, someone whose mind stays undisturbed in the face of any adversity, someone who strives with joy and delight in accumulation of virtue, someone who is cultivating concentration, someone who can meditate on emptiness. All these and other good qualities require the indispensable foundation of ethics. And ethics it can be understood on a coarser level in terms of restraining our physical behavior and our verbal speech. But in our context, and that is part of the training of ethics. But in the context here of developing really profound and transformative realizations, ethics is primarily focused on subduing the body and speech through subduing the mind. This is imperative. And the ethical approach for us to aspire to and develop is to have a pacified mind, a subdued mind, a tamed mind, which means a mind that is not overwhelmed by the afflictions. An ethical approach at this level is a mind that is not overwhelmed by the afflictions. Understanding that whichever afflictions may well overwhelm us, in a sense, they bring harm to self and others. There is a specific affliction of harmful intent, but one can understand that all the afflictions bring about harm to oneself and others, and certainly when they are expressed. So here, we need to pacify our mind, subdue our mind through ethics, with mindfulness and vigilance, ensuring that the afflictions either do not arise, or if they start to, they do not dominate us. This is the ethical approach, and it is the indispensable foundation to generate all the good qualities we aspire to.
Dine jimbe nyamle jagores, disu chasa yakboya laya jimbe nyamle jagores sache. Dagaresane, ngazole milya anichige tunjien da tunjien yagoshmena, da tunjien di mebe genchine tunjien de jubialia laga mangbo tabshi de chik delba nyachina ngazule chue nyamle jago brago mares. Chasa ngazole milya 강아 치쇼 당보 밀야 강아 치쇼도 튕기 매베 돈에 강아 리고레스 지산 튕기 약보 영화디디 진비 냠는 게 되고래 지산데는 가서이나 지게 채치마에네 냠내 약보 잡아라 최기 냠내 약보 영화라 가지고 아니 지게 튕기 약보시고 튕기 강아 매시고 된자 진비 냠내 되고레스 최대레네 가지고 진비 냠내 제바이나 소소기 아니 지게 진비 냠내 제는 소소게 왕탕 친구 용 그래 지 왕탕 친구 니버친구 제사 소수기 진배님네 지도 왕탕 친구에나 미디게 쳐서 왕도 현다디게 쳐서 왕도 뒤투어레스 소수 왕도 뒤투나 안에 가려어스네 콘줄야 최님네 제나 롭든 제반의 콘줄 인기레스 제사 판도요레스 제사 소수기 현 지 왕도 뒤제 현리아 판도 제야리아 안 진배님네 제오레스 세딜이나 진배년에 디체디기 님의 안에 지 개와 치마이나야 된데래 튕겨야 뭐야 취주야 뭐야 제사 되네기 진배 냠면서 다 진배 냠는다 진배 냠는 데야 상생의 진바도 취기 진바도 미치비 진바세 돼서 막무서 제가 되네자 다 진배 냠는 做계신 무시우래 선다 나 저기 취야고 주발라 아니 나 저기 튕기에 강하면 봐시고 그래서 현리야 취배와라야 현리 소식을 롭든지는 년바시 년두가 고고 대왕도 봐시고 그래 제가 진배 냠는 고고래서 되네자 다 두스는 송와 다 냠는 주인데 발전 주인 냠는 진배 냠는 당보 송동도와 되네 전주선바 남기 전주선바 초람바디게 당보 냠는 지나 발전 주가 냠는 능고어데 이나 조 가르는 배지 조 어디 가르 배지 제거서는 진배 냠는 조 제는 냠는 능고어래 저래 전주선바 초람바 여러와 대수게 발전 주가 냠는 지고어래 이내다 디나 조 가르 배지 망아 디 가르치고서 진배 냠는 조 지고어래 배지 그래서
within the presentation of the six perfections, generosity is presented first. And the reason for this is varied, but primarily in order to be able to have the time as well as the mental space to be able to engage in Dharma practice, receiving teachings and reflecting on them, one needs one's basic essentials met. If one is, for example, in impoverishment, struggling to support oneself, support one's family, one has unfavorable conditions for the Dharma. Even if the Dharma is available around oneself, if one cannot sustain one's life, one will be unable to apply oneself, certainly with any energy, into the Dharma. So to have sufficient favorable circumstances, both material and other, requires causes that come through the practice of generosity. And if our basic essentials are met, then there is the possibility that we can, under the influence of our other karmic imprints, engage in receiving teachings and reflecting on them, because we will have the time, if we choose to utilize it, to apply ourselves to the Dharma. But the practice of generosity, this is much broader than the term usually, than what usually comes to mind with this term. Material generosity is important, So too is generosity of giving fearlessness, as well as the generosity of giving the Dharma. And here, when we engage in the practice of generosity, cultivating the mind that wants to give, the wish to give of oneself in all ways possible within one's capacity to benefit others, cultivating that practice of generosity, we will give not just materially, but we'll support the lives of others and give the Dharma too. In this way, we cultivate broad karmic seeds. So when the life comes where those seeds ripen, and we are a person with some power, some influence, we can use that power and influence to be of benefit to others. We can use these karmic imprints we've accumulated to be of benefit to others. And being of benefit to others, we understand as meaning in providing both the material conditions required so that teachings can be received, as well as giving the teachings, bestowing the teachings ourselves. And in fact, for bodhisattvas on the path of accumulation, whilst they are engaging in all the perfections, they're primarily engaging in that of generosity.
This is true. The Lamrim Nala Yamlenche Rimba Dang to this took the Sungorwa, Chesa, the name is that Nyanjeti Lam Yamlenchine, Didu Yamlenchigore, Rajeti Yamlenchevane, Didu Yamlenchigore, Janjusemba again and Yamleche, Didu Yamlenchigore, that Janjusim Kuno de la Jibade, Redukuno Jam Nijeta, Janjusim Yukunela, Jan Didu Yamlenchide, that Tabachim to water. Cesada, San Diego Tobala, and Didu Yamlenchine, San Diego Toko, that's San Diego. Go back to you saw it. Then answer that the Geshe the Dina and the Zord that share a passion Yamle said, don't want you to be shared of Digoshi, don't want you Digoshi or that Dina June and that Tosho you call the answer Digoshi or.
These 6 trainings are presented in reverse sequence, are engaged in by all practitioners who are striving with sincerity to achieve their goal of either liberation from samsara or enlightenment. So those practitioners of the here and solitary realizer lineage, they engage in these 6 practices of generosity, ethics, patience, joyous perseverance, concentration, and wisdom. And they do so to achieve the goal of liberation from samsara. The bodhisattva too engages in these same practices, but they conjoined with bodhicitta and therefore are called perfections. So therefore the bodhisattva also has engaged in the prior cultivation of love and compassion, developing them to the point of bodhicitta. And their engagement then in these practices of generosity and so forth, conjoined with bodhicitta, and have the goal, the objective of bodhicitta, Buddhahood, as their final destination. And we are in the context of looking at the cultivation of wisdom. So therefore, we can understand all practitioners, whether they are of the Tibetan inclination or the Mahayana inclination, they need to engage in these 6 practices for the reasons set out, so that they can achieve their respective goals.
Ada sangye toyegi jenshu simgyu kunne laje jamjewa jamba da jawa jenshu simgyu kunno thone diparjun chudi nyamlen jeba na da sangye tobe gyure sangye ko ba toya gyudi diri ese jesan di nyamlen je na tarchin de sangye cha ru go ba jesan dine enza da nga zule sangye cha tuguri besen tuguri ese da to tuyi gymde garela na dichosan sabon dingan zu gyule yeri bare ese ro da nga zule jamba se de jambes kasan shuba na jin shanlia chike 소수기 파마다 분야다 진짜 잠바치야 요래 제와 요래 디수차상 누가 공부했나야 안심전 되내기 이제 현다듬게 즉 디기 주나 동안 전화 선비게 삼랑하선 연구로와 여러와다 곧 누가 시shum마도 되내기 요래 다 제는 아주 진비 냠내 줘야 즉 진비 냠내 진바 당긴세베 자위 아주 내가 주길래 진바 여러와 진비냐 변내랑이 분야를 돼야 파마를 돼야 아디와 강아테를 지게 교어디를 돼서로 제기 세베 삼로 진비 냠내 삼바데 여디 바래 근데 수름세에 어다 지금 아주 여러와다 아니 어디 구마군에 야고 말에 선배 삼로 여래 미 준신에 야고 미고다 야고 요 말에 선배 삼로 여러와다 수름이 시세게 자와데 여여 바래 근데 쇠바야 여러다 쇠배 자와 여러 근데 삼대 something ye zawa de yor dang Gabriel shanda sha some chik yan chik chala chik lina karina ya some zishi de some da de yuan ding yi yor ba de chi ko yun be chik 통동 마도 매네 되게 여여 말해. 제가 당한 저기 셰럽세 제바 제기 어디 야고라 디제네 야고 디네 야고 말씀 뵙게 제바 제기 셰럽대 여여. 지상 자위기 차상 파신 루기 자위 사번 당 장슈심기 다 잠니지게 사번 차상 상여고 본토에 유사번 차상 하지길래 여여 말해. 지상디 여여 반자 딩한 저기 야네 야도 고 야네 야도 고 김전 삼다 제바 제 아니 그 대소 공부에는 편여 여바 삼다 마공부에는 소설야 용력이 받아 되게 삼다도 제바체 야네 야도 숨제 대소 공부에는 되네야 누바디 숙체셔 루구리스 지나디 셔셔로도 아주 양호 공부도 줘도 되네 상교고 바나 토야라 타냐는 게 루고라 제가 되네자 마 상교고 바 톱투리스 자위기 사번 차상 나눠주길래 여여 말해제 네 가상하죠 셰바나는 나가를 다디
The exalted state of Buddhahood is attained through the generation of bodhicitta, which itself comes about in dependence on love and compassion. So these trainings of love and compassion develop to the strength where they arise in as bodhicitta. This is the very root of Buddhahood. And conjoined to this root will be the varying activities of generosity, ethics, and so forth. And as I mentioned last night, all of these, we have seeds of them on our continuum. They are not strangers to any of us. For some of these, we will have stronger seeds on our continuum, or a greater number, and others less. But all of them, we do possess on our continuum. Seeds for love, we all have. We have love for family, love for friends. Compassion too. Compassion for those that we are close to, as well as compassion for strangers. Both of these seeds readily ripen. Also generosity, caring for the wanting to give up ourselves, in particular to those we're close to, but also for strangers. Ethics too. We have the seeds for ethics. We know that certain behavior is wrong and should be discouraged and avoided. Taking life, stealing, deceiving others. Concentration as well, whilst our mind may seem so distracted. At times, we certainly are more concentrated than at others. And wisdom too, with its more literal, with its clearer translation of intelligence. Certainly we all have intelligence, knowing that this is a better option than that, and so forth. All of these trainings, we possess the seeds on our continuum. Those seeds have been acquired in dependence on prior activity. Therefore, they are dependent arisings, which means they can be developed, they can be enhanced and added to. And this too needs to be reflected on and recognized, because it gives us confidence, a strength of mind, that knowing that there's nothing in these teachings that is beyond us. I do not need to make an aspiration for some future life. I can make great progress in this very life. It is not beyond any of us. I can arise as a bodhisattva in this very life. I can strive and with a clear knowledge that enlightenment nears every day. This is all possible for us because we possess these seeds on our continuum. They have been accumulated independently, and therefore they can be strengthened and enhanced.
지나다 덴바 줍되베나 마즈길라 자와디에네 교다에 메바 덴바 줍어서 갈라에 마디오바 코 교원이 메가 차된자 야게 줘야 메바래 덴바 마주보인장 현실의 뒤에 두고요 반자 교다에 되바래 지상 인하주기 셈 라신 주변 동바시다 셈게 라신디 라신 주변 동바래 지상 셈게 라신라 견탐제단 자와래 마주 셈게 라신디 근데 simge rangshin de karso korsene ane rangshin nyangde nyangde de pares rangshin ko nyomo ba 탐제 다 주요 말해서 제사 라신 야데 진짜 되는 현상 심 나오주게 심 라신 유튜브 또 봐서 라신 야데래 세도 라신 유견 탐제다 자와래라 그러와 진짜 라신 예 상기래 진짜 나오주기라 상기 요래 세제 아니 지게 되네기미 되네게 지게 나오주기라 상기 요래세 송화야 용고래 디 요래세 송화디 김세가래서는 나중에 심 라신 유튜브 동바디다 사이게 심 라신 유튜브 동바인데 개발고 개발지에 매발에 지상 나중에 심 라신 냥을 대발에 저 라신 견 탐제된 자와래 지상 라신 사이에 지상 디 나중에 여봐서 나중에 사이 요래 세지 어도 송나지 용걸 나중에 나중에 대야 지금 나중에 리기루 받아 되네기 지나 나중에 대주의 라신이 냥대 요래서 라신 냥대서마도 당아주기라 샘진기라 상계 요래 때 송고 말에 되네게 가시에 나라 슝가시에 다 되네게 송가야 요살다 되네게 델레 삼다제 상계 요래서 라신기 냥대서야데 요바자 고 라신 예상데 인자 나주기라 상계 요래서 삼다다 지바리다.
Well, I just mentioned in the previous segment, we looked at last night, and we also looked at how our mind is naturally empty, naturally freed of stains. The stains of the afflictions and the seeds and the imprints, these are all adventitious. They are not inherent to the nature of the mind. And when these stains are completely eradicated, we attain the state of non-abiding nirvana. And this can be done so because our mind is naturally empty, freed of all stains and imprints. If our mind existed in the way that all phenomena appear, as being truly existent, meaning independent, not influenced by anything at all, and therefore not being influenced by anything, there would be nothing for it, that nothing could bring about change. It would therefore be unchanging. It could not improve. But this is not the case. Our mind is not truly existent. Like all other phenomena, our mind is not truly existent. And this empty nature of our mind, this natural emptiness, this natural purity of our mind, this is our Buddha lineage, our Buddha potential. So here, this is expressed in differing ways. In our tradition, we express this as Buddha lineage or Buddha potential, saying that because our mind in its very nature is no different from that of a Buddha, we have the potential to attain enlightenment. All of us do. Because, and just use a different translation of Buddha potential, we are all of the lineage of the same family as a Buddha. In other traditions, they express the same meaning in a different way, saying we are already Buddhas because the nature of our mind is no different than that of a Buddha. Just we haven't recognized it. It is obscured, but we are Buddhas. So that is how it is expressed in some traditions. In our tradition, we express the same meaning in a different way, expressing our potential to become a Buddha. But the key point is this is something we all have. And therefore, the attainment of these great states is not beyond any of us.
Dao san ye ningbo jen se sumo re. Dao se de semjen tamji yu la san ye yi de ningbo jen se de rangshin yu tupyo dongba ane de ningbo de san ye yi ngo yu rung ye ane chi sabon de yo re se. Jisa dao san ye ningbo jen le semjen tamji yu la ane san ye ngo yu rung ye ningbo de sabon de yo re se de dao chen ne sumo re. Jisa rangshin yu san ye sabon yu be gyum chen do sumo re. Jisa dao san ye ningbo jen se de san ye yu ye yu Nipa sabon ningbo di ngā tsukila yore.
Maitreya, in his text, Sublime Continuum, or the Uttara Tantra, he states explicitly that all beings have the Tathagata essence, and therefore, having this Buddha potential, this Tathagata essence, they can attain enlightenment. Let's turn then to the text. And last night we looked at the verse at the top of page 20 from Nagarjuna. Now we turn to the actual composition from His Holiness. So looking at the first sentence, therefore, when the way a tree, for instance, exists is analyzed, the tree is not found, but its natural state of existing, or emptiness, is found.
인수 시대 되니기 임바 나신 나수 될바 지기야 제바 제지간에 두세 제바 지도 갈아야 아니 전시된 이거 말해서 가슴 지기야 제바 전시 많이 봐지 디 전신 라신 주변 동바의 내용을 해서 내로삼 동인이 그래서 제 전시의 나와 나신디 매바 동상하지마도 가인이고 동상하지 이거 전시의 이거 말 나와 나신 전시의 이거 말 된데 된바도 봐면 동백의 동산이 이거를 제가 디 전시되게 내룩이 이거를 동반이더라 그런 거 뭐 간데시면 우리 니수 변해요 내룩이 통고래서 디 통함 동이 통화 지바래 제 내룩 통화들 제가 내룩섬 동이 내용 무슨 디 통고래서 니에서 봐 도고래서 도고래서 니 봐서 내가 잘할 마서나 세네 라서는 니 봐라 디나지 그 심주체도 디가 도고래라는 전시 마도와체 부두시 나와나 신전시의 파 마도 매바제 이 동북의 동상의 이거래서 도고래지래. 제자 내룩도 이거죠. 내룩 삼세 내룩스나 동반이스나 디 라신기 라신대로 라신 덴바도 라신 주변 동바디 디 동고래 도고래지래.
Here the text is using as an illustration a tree. So if we want to come to understand the way that a tree exists, its way of existing, first we need to see or come to recognize how it appears to our mind. This is where the analysis is done. We look at how does this tree appear to our mind how does it appear to exist to our mind? And we come to understand that the tree appears to us as being independent of, for example, our mind. It appears to be self-existent or established from its own side. It doesn't appear as if it is dependent at all. This is how it appears to us. So that is the first step in the analysis. Because if you want to know how something exists, we need to understand how it appears to exist. What way does it appear to exist? So the way it appears is to be independent. Then we engage in analysis, and we find that the tree is not found. No self-existent tree, no tree existing from its own side is found. Rather, the natural state of existing, or emptiness, is found. This term then, natural state of existing, is also translated as a natural way of abiding, which what is the natural way of existing, or the natural way of abiding of phenomena, such as this tree? It's that they are empty of existing from their own side. So therefore, what is found is emptiness. So here, this then further to say that this term find or found, here and other contexts, some other contexts too, we should understand it means to realize. So just like if you've lost something and you look for it and you find it, you could say, I've realized it. It was here all along. Or I've realized I never had it. It doesn't exist. So this term to find, we can understand to mean as to realize. And equally, the term a natural state of existing or abiding means emptiness.
이상 당하주의 직신도를 지도 스타디 나주려 직샤로도 갑랑아주 갈성부도스네 베니 신동도 피랑 예대바지 나주 셈다 저 균이 메디게 그럼 파기랑 여바로 지가 저게 나야 되는 거데 나주 삼로 나래 되는지 연구도 와대 대견도 나래 비시 연구기랑 알아야 되는 안 되는 삼도 와대 집 나야도 집 신동 그럼 나주 셈들 균이 저 균이 메디게 거랑 거랑 집 피기라 예대 바로 능이 난고래 나와나 되는지 두 선비가 삼로 나래 되는지 셔도 와대 이点도 셔다디 인서로 와대 나다디 인서로 라싱 두바 나다디 인서로 와대 안저게.
And speaking from my side, when I observe the trees outside, they do seem to appear to my mind as if they are unconnected with my mind. They have no relationship with my mind, therefore are independent. So this is how phenomena do appear to me. And it's for you individually to check if that is the way that the trees and other phenomena appear to your mind too.
나디네 삼다데 안가 저기 행동도 통고를 받아 저기. 나 통고도 다 수이 통고라서 내가 미기 셰비기 통고를 받아 미기 셰비 통고를 받아. 내가 삼르스다데 미기 셰비기 행동 통도 겁라. 직 권유 투고를 받아. 유대 셰바니도 투고를 받아. 투도 아 저기 미기 셰바데 대여를 받아. 미기 원본하려고. 셰바데 파주고를 배 파주어지 행동들을 투고를 배. 나는 셰바데 대되지 피기주 행동 수용 정도 셰바데 투고를 해서 권유 유지지 해야 돼. 대 수용고를 배 셰바 파주고를 삼다면은 즉 제 두아데 파로에네 바라들이야 아니 즉 룽기 계시 셰바데 파 잔다도 셰바데 판 통토야세요 말봐 제산디 셰바 파주구를 비해서 아니 셰바데 파주구에나 셰바데 파주구에 봐있는다 셰바 댄서 미 온보된 주고 말봐 다 디고 댄서데 말어버지 맞된 바델라 카데지 코로베나 띵아서다 제와 매바로 차이도 와데 제메 제산디 인자 안디기 파로지 통바는 아서데 제와 매나 아니 그 셰바데 파도 통외내 가서 통야기 내봐미도아 셰바데 파 두고여바나 미기 온보드나 카제진 두고로 봐 카제는 저 셰바데 편이 신도 통보했네 땡가라 저기 네 통고도 라요 민도 와갔네 디 나나 제메진 파조시 통고로 봐 배나 저 라바로 샤바네 라바데 신도는 투발라 라바도 파조로 봐 당아 주 수부 뒤에 지나서 뒤에 수부 뒤에 라바 파 고체 비티 라바디 편이 신도한테 투베네 내 신도한테로 투선 랍투야 말아 가서 라바디 가서 수부된 제메톤의 조제 코론 투바라 봐 제상의 신도들 라바 창이 라요 말아 그래서 라바 창에 신 라바데다 아니 나중에 제메톤의 파 카제네 고조 동화로 니나신 아주 미기 셰바디야 나주 수부디나 카제제 나서다 카제제 파조지 신도의 통화이나 진바이나 아니 내 신도의 통선 랍투야 민도와 그래서 통견 셰바디 아주 제메 차사로 와
Recognizing that phenomena such as a tree appear to be unconnected, unrelated to our mind, existing from their own side, not relying on anything at all, including our consciousness, is something then to investigate. So how is it that the object, such as a tree, appears to my consciousness? The object, the tree is out there in the forest. my consciousnesses, in this case my eye visual consciousness, is here within my body. So is it that my eye consciousness travels from my body and encounters the object tree? Or is it that somehow the tree comes in and enters into my visual consciousness? How does this process work? And if there was this process of the two meeting in either way, what happens if the wind picks up later and is very strong? Will the tree now start, the appearance of the tree change? Will it be blown away in terms of the appearance? So this is something to think about. Because, for example, if I'm sitting here and to perceive the tree, my eye sense consciousness needs to travel out and encounter the tree, it wouldn't then be my visual consciousness seeing the tree, because that consciousness is operating independent of me. I'm here, and my visual consciousness would be with the tree. I couldn't say that I've seen the tree, but rather that a visual consciousness has. Because this would be just like if I, sitting here, could physically touch that tree, then my arm would have traveled on its own, be disconnected with my body, encountering the tree. It wouldn't be my arm, it would be independent of me. But this, of course, is not how either our visual consciousness or our body encounters objects.
미기 셰바 용서요 말아와. 세상 미기 셰바 옹보 땜바자다 미기 셰바데 옹보 마템바지 파 조번에 미기 셰바데 랑원의 주바 샤도 그러와다. 랑원의 주 현라 마되바 그런 조원의 제투에 제가 랑원의 주바 제가 세상 미기 셰바데 옹보를 땡거를 마도 bên 미기 셰바데 파 조에 있나 당아서 두 삼다다 미기 셰바데 파된 조바 있나 아니 이 분이 행동을 주 따라 통하야 이거 미기 셰바데 가서 옹보다 카제 조번에 미기시 왕보디 파 값셔번에 셰바디 펜디숙 통고를 배 셰바 신 통고를 해서 통고 말로 가서 왕보디를捐식捐당바이나 셰바 요라마 제사 셰바디 디 왕보디를 띠엔제 디여디 바 인비게 세부로 제거로 왔다 가서 왕보디 값셔번에 펜디식이 통고 말에 제사다 미기 셰바 된제 파 신도도 파 따가 파 조번에 왕보 값셔번에 고조는 통고하시러 와 제사 왕보 값셔는 통면도 와 제사디 미기 셰바디 왕보를 띠엔제 대여되바 세부로 차거로와 되는자 미기자 파두고 말에 행동의 추연고 말 안다 행동의 간지 통고래서
Our visual consciousness, this depends on its sense power, the eye sense power. If it did not depend on the sense power, it would be not dependent, independent, self-existent. Which would mean if we were to obstruct the eye sense power, for example, covering our eye, our visual consciousness would still be able to perceive. So with eyes closed, it would be able to observe trees and so forth. But this is, of course, not the case. The visual consciousness then clearly is depending on, for example, the eye sense power. So then, if the tree isn't traveling into our eye, and our eye sense consciousness is not traveling to the tree, then how do we perceive objects?
And the sometime Yamsurachiduade, Kansarachi, Umruadanga, Jigni, Uini, Matova, and Denishi, Yungurua. 제가 데니인자다 나도나 가르숨 거스네 페이지게 나 긴지 체네 나서 원보실래 낭네 아니 진고 능고래 맞 긴지 체네 능고래 지되네 파지 낭네 될야 뢰바디 행동을해서 파 뢰바 따바 좀 요바래서 지상 뢰 따바 좀 요바래마도 심주도 전에 미기디 파조와레베 신도 추용고레베 안데 판이 신 미디다 저메디 신도의 판이 여바이나 신도디 아주 셰발라 마데오 코랑 뭐네 주투에 차기도 하지 랑문 주베 차기도 와서 두 심지 전에 신도도 녀요 말했어. 신도도 이게 말했어. 제가 많이 봐 신도 많이 봐 가는 것은 동사지 이게래서. 제가 신동이 전신 동사지 전신 동반이 또 그래서 이게래서 되는 거.
We go through the purpose of going through this analysis, or it is important to go through this analysis because you all understand how it is that objects appear to the eye. But the point is to see how the objects actually appear to consciousness as being independent, and then investigate to see that they clearly are actually dependent, and therefore are empty of existing the way they appear as independent, but are rather dependent. Because for an object to appear to consciousness requires many causes, and in the case of the tree, one requires the eye sense consciousness, its sense power, as well as light and other causes. And then the object appears dependently. But that's not how it appears to us. It appears as if it is independent, not requiring the mind to perceive it, not requiring anything to exist, being self-existent. So here then, when we investigate, no tree is found, or no truly existent, no independent tree is found, but rather emptiness is realized, emptiness is found, and all that appears then is the pure empty state.
다 나주게 동게 제신이 수년디 셔와 나도 요르베스네 요레 제치디 아니 셔와나 셔요 말 셔와도 데다고 말다 대샤샤르와 땅안서 데데르와 두시데 땅안서 동게 제신이 수년디 수년지 요레 가와 요레레데 동강을 요르베스네 이 미강을 요르베스네 얘는 통고를 수지 통고하고 수그려와 얘는 통고고로 수지 통고요 말하다 매로 다니 멜론다니 셔고나를 요르베스네 셔고나를 요 말와 다도 신의 셔고도 수수해제되는 따변나 동게 제지 수인이 샤용 거다 다대지 동게 제지 수인 샤용 바디 다주 뒤심주체도 아니 가와 요레스도 내 나로 요르베스네 백이 여바 셔기도 왔어 대 여바 셔기도 안 시대 여바는 백이 셔고나면은 셔고면나 통고에 통빈도 와시래 다른 분이 제신 중인데 배 셔고들 여바네 셔고 치료도 요래 셔고 잡로 요래 디 셔고 빨아도 요래서 심진데 셔고 빨아네 요 말에 다 셔고 치료 여바네 셔고디 다 미니 빨아 동바 빨아들 여바네 중에 수시 여바네 디 요래 배선 디 심진데 예매로 다 도시 심주체나 동게 제신데 그 가와 요래 쓰지다네 자오기는 예야 말에 이내 아직 셔고래 제가 멜론다 멜론의 긴 멜론다 하는 거 주고 제신이 긴 디파체네 미게 통해도 미리야 되는 수인시 샤용 거래서 되는 수인 샤와나 수인디 아주 미게 나로디와 디나로 요르베샤당 아니 셔고 나로 요르베 셔고 치료로 요르베선 삼다도 시심지네 이네 매르와다 예 얘기도 왔어 제가 되는 연사 아주 두 나요도 갑래 나서 동 조부 잡장아서 동 임바로 있는 거래. 세상 돈라 나서 동 요말 레요말 디심주진 제네 녀메데 동사지 맞으면 왔어. 진짜 비디 나신아 저 유카레 나면에 멜롱에 나의 제신 나와 나신 현실의 뒤치 파 낭제 안델바 르 다네 용고래서 디 용고를 마도 현실의 뭐기 현실의 뒤네 마주바 코롱원에 다가랑 예대바치 자와기는 요 말에 세지. 근데 아주 숨고를 받아.
Similarly, if in the morning we're washing our face and we wonder, where's the reflection of my face? Its form, I should be able to see it, but we're not seeing a reflection. Then we take our hand, we pick up the mirror, the handheld mirror, and place it in front of our face. And suddenly there, we found the reflection. So now we found this reflection. Where is this reflection of our face? Because what is appearing to us is our face. It appears as our face. There's no recognition of it coming about in dependence on a variety of causes, but this reflection appears to exist from its own side. So now we ask ourselves, where is this reflection? Is it in the mirror? Is it in our eye? And when we investigate, we'll see that no self-existent reflection can be found in the mirror, nor within our consciousness either, or any of our consciousness, our visual or conceptual consciousnesses. No self-existent reflection can be found. So here, in this way, we come to recognize that the reflection too may appear as if it's independent of causes and so forth, but it's clearly dependent. Dependence on a mirror, dependence on the object before the mirror, dependent on the perceiving visual consciousness, sense power, and conceptual consciousnesses. It's widely dependent, but yet, like all objects, appears as if it's independent, self-existent. But when we investigate, we recognize that it's empty. All we find is emptiness.
Jinga zuge bene yigi로 충충으로 지나 두스네 미시 마거나 그네 통마도 같이 로다 충충으로 bene 뒤체이나다 되네기 충충으로 지가 미기 통마도 같이 두스때데 막 통마도 되네 메시에 미시에 주 관용도 bene 이기나다 메뉴 수디 채타세 통고를 받아 당아 주게 삼나래 미기 되네기 통하는 거래 되네기 미기 통하게 수디 메뉴도 선배 삼나 미기 통하는 먹이 여바로 통고하래 통고하래 난고하래 아주 삼나나에 먹이 두서 배삼로 쉬어래 되네기 미시고데 직 이게 채타시 통해야지 매니 여말 추주마 돼요 말아 매니 디나지도 통하는 채타시 여반에 미시 막고 내 통고로 와디 통고 말아 난고 말아 진짜 미시도 고한다도 채타시 난고하래 아주 따디 qabla 채타시 매기라 여바로 난고하래 아주 삼나나에 먹이 두 삼고래 디 낭소디다 미시디면에 통하여 말해. 안다 대시 뭐에 될라다 디나진 나와나진 전부도 매러봐다. 매나 아주 나에게 전부도 가화요랬다. 미시 나로 요르베스. 다 수그로 봐다. 미시 나로 요르벨라나 미시 나로 여바이나 매니 죽딜 대샤지 수도 파지 미시 두스타베네 수인치 다시 디나 통고로 디 통하면도 와. 통고 말아봐. 나는 미시드나 미시는 매 and 가하여 미나로 여르베스네 미나로 여바나 미시 마고나에 통고여로 와 제자디 아주 미시고네 때도 수인 채다서 샤야디 제나 미기 원래메 미시 나로메 아주 미나레메 제네 녀메 이나 마다 마제바이나 직셔고래 직셔시 디로고래 디던다 두고 두고래 제자 매이기 긴 망보직 초발에 때네 미리 직셔용고래 샤는 저기 디두스 르파 파다고래 제가 되네자 최근에 지내 디나시세 제가 호 견현지를 되네 직샤 될파 르파 직 디레서 딱을 모두 나와 나시지 심지현제네 녀요 말해서 제가 동사도 마도 이게 말해서 누스네 안데 제가 제하로 송고로 발 빼로스 마서 내가 좀 되니게
Similarly, as we age and our eye sense powers degenerate, reading can become a little difficult. And we look at a page and it's not very clear, it's quite blurred. We put on glasses, suddenly it's vivid. But if that's not enough, we may hold up a magnifying glass. Then we can read very clearly what's on the page before us. So what's going on here? Because we have now these letters and words appearing to consciousness. When we investigate, how do they appear? They don't appear as being dependent. They too, like all phenomena, appear as if they exist by way of their own essence, independently. But if that were the case, If that were the case, consequences would follow. And in your meditation, remind yourselves of the consequence, not merely of the obviousness or the absurdity of the illustration, but remind yourself of the consequences. That if these large, clear letters existed from their own side, that would mean causes weren't required. That if we were then to move the magnifying glass away from the page, we should still be able to read those large letters. But of course not, because amongst the causes, the magnifying glass needs to be over the letters. Likewise, if we were to look away from the magnifying glass, if the causes, if the large letters appeared in the eye consciousness, then we would still see them, but we do not. We require the causes, amongst others, of the page and the magnifying glass. So we see here the consequences of how the phenomenon would exist if it were independent, and how that is absurd. It cannot exist in this way. And we don't leave it at that. We then say, so how does the phenomenon merely exist? And that is as labeled by mind. Independence on many causes coming together, such as the page, the glasses, the visual consciousness, visual sense consciousness, a visual sense power, and many conceptual consciousnesses. We can then label that object. And again, depending on other causes, we can label it in differing ways, as a particular word with meaning. So therefore, the phenomenon is empty of existing in the way that it appears. And emptiness is found or realized. The object, the self-existent object, that is not found. And how does it exist? Dependently on many causes and labeling by mind.
마타 마제바나 그런 유해돼 봐지 그런 게 유해돼 봐지 디기 자와지 된다 두투거와 아니 다신 집에서는 이 전부디 얘기님에 동사지 최고래 진짜 디나시 전신디게서 낭모두 아주 나야나 나와나신 능거데 마타 마제베스는 전신 나와나 전신 유해되지 전신 그런 자와 두거래 진짜 다신 집에서는 다 간에스도 간에 가와도 나와나 간에스도 제바는 예매바 동사지마도 니 말해서 진짜 그 랑신디마도 랑신 동바이 니 거래서 어데다 도스중 송거봐 최담제 최간의 신의 되는 시에서 우리가 현실을 뒤에 아주를 나 류파데 다네 외래 말이마도 다신 집에서는 그 랑신디 간에스도 나와나 뒤에서 제바는 그 랑신 동바이 니 그리마도 아니 나와나 신진이 두 말해서
With the magnified letters, if one doesn't think about it, doesn't investigate, they exist in the way they appear. We can read and we can function, and the letters can function. But if we do investigate, firstly, how they appear to consciousness and whether they exist in that way or not, they cannot be found. So too, with the tree outside, it appears to consciousness. And if we leave it at that, we go about our day not thinking about how the tree appears and whether it exists in this way or not, it's fine. The tree is there and it is found in that way. But if we investigate, we cannot find a tree that exists in the way that it appears. It does not exist in the way that it appears. It's empty of existing in the way that it appears. It's empty of inherent or natural existence. It doesn't mean, though, that it's non-existent. It's dependent on many causes, parts, and labeling by mind. Its nature, its emptiness, its natural state of existing or its natural state of abiding is emptiness, because nothing else is found.
데네 나 동이기 인술에 제베 동반이 데니 미니베 데 동이디 동이 내용과 인사.
So therefore, Any phenomenon such as a tree, when one investigates, one comes to recognize it does not exist in the way that it appears, but is empty of existing independently. Then returning to the text, the next sentence. Then, when the way emptiness exists is analyzed, that emptiness itself also is not found, but is rather found to be empty.
Adi garsongorsan 대신 한쪽에 전신이 파 간스낭도 나와 나신 두게도 민도 제바체도 안에 가야마도 제바 전신만이 바지 전시 등에 동바 있는 얘기를 동바이 또 그래서로 다 대송만잔 안다 되니게 동바이 그런 안다 그러 다 대시 전신 그러다 랑문에 마루 바래 자 제바체도 전신 나와 나신 만이 바지 니니에게 잡라가서 전시게 동바이 있는 얘기 그래서 안다 동바이 되니게 동바이다 동유도 일로디 녀바인자 되니게 동바이디 랑문에 주바 레베사지 다디 랑문 진짜 샤사 레베사지 삼당거와 되니 레벨라네 디아 랑문에 주바 마레스 다 마레 숨거와다
Reading these two sentences together, we first recognize that when a tree, the way that the tree exists, or the way that the tree exists is analyzed, we find that it's empty of existing in the way that it appears. It's empty of inherent existence. Or the way that it exists, that is found, is emptiness. But what about then this emptiness that is found, that is realized? Is that self-existent? Here we see in the second sentence that the nature of the tree, the natural way of it abiding, its emptiness, this too is not self-existent or independent.
지산다 동반이로 되게 동반이고 어디나 동반이디야 랑원이 죽되 바래봤는데 말해서 maybe 김자 가래람나 동반이 그런을 봐 로는 지금 나와나 시슈로 동반인데 삼다 다 동반인데 로 나와나 시 동반인데 가서 투스 제베네 동반이 얘기 말해서 그런야 니네게 동반이디야 많이 봐 동사진 얘기래서 제산디 동반인데 그런 많이 봐 동사디 동반이게 동반이라 그래서 제산디 동반이 그런 제바치서 시 동반인데 뭐여서 시 샤제 니네게 동반인데 가서 투스 제바치도 나와나 시 동반인데 예요 말해서 많이 봐디 동산이 용을 딘 동산이에디 대시 동반이디게 동이시게 제자들의 동반이 동이라 그래서
Bearing in mind that the word found can, and certainly here does, mean to realize. When one investigates the tree, emptiness is found. Its empty, natural state of existing, emptiness, that is found. So now one has realized emptiness, the pure empty state. So all that so now emptiness appears to consciousness. Then one asks, emptiness itself, does it exist from its own side, by way of its own nature, independently? And when one investigates, no self-existent emptiness is found either. Once again, pure empty state, emptiness itself is realized.
동반이 바인스 데니 동반이 인스 데니기다지 동반이 호라 제바체네 동반이 제바체기 시 동반이 많이 바지 디 동산이에디 데니 동반이 인스.
And it's at this point that the emptiness of emptiness is realized. That's in the next sentence. This is called the emptiness of emptiness.
데니 인자다 데나 전신이 군습된 바다 디 니루데 되는 바스.
The next sentence then. Thus, a tree is a conventional truth, but its natural state of existing is an ultimate truth.
제산 전신 그런 군주된 바레스 그래서네 군주된 바스 그런 규단진 샹라 되네 바지 게되게 아니 자와 제되는지 그래서 군도 템바를 쓰게 됐어. 나디 고 마다 마제바치나 고 줍디가지 예리바지 군도 템바. 단 전시고랑 다신 제베스나 니에메 동상디 전시에 된 니루르 되는 템바레스. 지난 전시 그런 게 뭐들이야 되는 템베 뭐지다 군도 템베 뭐지 니 되게다 니 호라리 그 니가다 전시당 뭐디다 그런 게 니루게 동반 용원이디 뭐 예매로 차도를 예매로지 자야매 개발 미팅하지.
Reading the sentence again. Thus a tree is a conventional truth, but its natural state of existing is an ultimate truth. The tree itself is a conventional truth arising dependence on various causes and conditions and able to perform a function, but when investigated, its very nature, its way of abiding or way of existing is emptiness. It's empty of existing in the way that it appears. So here, on a single basis, this tree, the two truths are found. The conventional truth of the tree being a dependent arising, and its nature, ultimate truth, emptiness. And these two, which are found on one basis, are indivisible. The two truths found on one basis are indivisible.
Adine zada tongpa ni dia rashing juba mare la ruada. Chesa tongpa ni rashing juba mare la ide ane rashing jubna garres ne kangla ya ma dyo ba chi kangla ya ma dyo ba chi yoku korwa. Chesa tongpa ni se di jwenxing tongsang yi tongpa ni di kangla ya ma dyo ba de mare shenji le du go res du ne yong go res. Chesa ko shenji le du ne yong ba sa ane tongpa ni ka sa rang ni juba de mare es or tong yi di.
Emptiness is not inherently existent. If it were so, it would be independent. But the emptiness of this tree is a dependency, it's mutually dependent. So therefore, emptiness cannot be inherently existent, but is also empty of inherent existence.
And the Dombani, Junshin, Rashing to be Dombadi, Dombani then, Sulu Dugore, Kawa Dugore says, Chipashim Chibana. Junshin Rashing to be Dombani, Junshin le Dugore. Junshin Rashing to be Dombani, Junshin le Dugore. Carson, Junshin Yena, Junshin Rangun to be Domba de Ligrimado, Junshin Mena, Junshin Rangun to Domba says, Geshe Thubten Rabten. Chesa Doni de Junshin, Domba Nidi, Caso Tempasi or Nagarel Dingors, Junshin le Dingores, Chesa Junshin le Dine, and Domba in the Ligores. Chesa Junshin Rashing to be Domba Nidi, Junshin Rashing Domba Nidi, Sulatingors, Junshin le Dine Yungor Mother, Junshin la Mateba, Yamar, Chesa Junshin le Dugores. Jine Junshin le Dugore. Jine Lui Pa Tonga de Delia, Junshi Dombani, Junshin Rash Domba Res, Lui Pa Tapa Dugores. Chesa Junshin la Din Dongshin, Junshin la Dimbada, and Didayake, Lulpa Dube, Diniga le Dugore. Chesa Dini le Dune, and Junshin Domba in the Yunguri Mado, Dini le Madoba, Junshin Domba in the Ayama. Chesa Junshin Domba in the Ramon Majuba, Cassan le Dugu as or.
And the emptiness of the tree, it has just been stated, is not inherently existent because it is dependent. So what is the emptiness of the tree dependent on? Firstly, it's dependent on the tree itself. Because if there were no tree, there could be no discussion of the emptiness of the tree. So there's a relationship of mutual dependency between the two. And then secondly, the emptiness of the tree is also dependent on labeling by mind. So in these two ways, the emptiness of the tree is dependent, and being dependent, it cannot be independent, in other words, inherently existent, but is empty of being inherently existent.
And 지산 가슴 대신한 저기 지게 면허 수년을 봐 제바체다 신도를 봐 삼다 제바체탄도 삼다에도 나디 디 파라델이야 체다야나 체다롱에게 냥아 체다 홍에게 냥아 용거래 야나 딱살 차에 통에 냥아 용거래 곧 아니지 우메람래 지고 이제 또야디다 아주 전신이 나와나 신지 요 말에 이내다 전신 요래 세팅을 다 튕기 불능은 신다 탄이다 다치 탄이다 저기 우마식으로 탄이다 저 그래서 나와나 신지 요 말에 세지 대 다다다 잡아돼 다 진신시디단 나와나 요 말에 자오기네 매봐야 말에 마다 마집에 전신도 요래스 그래서 전신이 마다 마집에서는 전신도 요래스 그래서다 이내 나와나 신지 요 말에서 다다 마다 균에 자와기네 매봐야 말했어. 지도 체다다 봐야지. 제가 전신이 마다 마집에서는 요래서. 제가 다다다 다시게 다니다 자와서. 도시네 리고. 다 제제 되네 인자 델야 삼다나도 지도 안디 제바라들야다 도심지 다 나와나 심지 어디 전신이 민도하다 전신 민도 써야 돼. 제가 다 전신 매봐는 최 가리네 도스 나와나 다 최 가리네 자와이네 민도아 선별라도 체달리고.
Take whether you look at the illustrations I've given of the tree or the mirror and others. Here we need to always guard ourselves from falling off the middle way approach, falling off into either or both of the extremes of nihilism and reification. Because first one realizes phenomena do not exist in the way that they appear. And realizing that may lead to the falling into the extreme of nihilism, which it would be, therefore they are completely non-existent. I've looked, couldn't find the object, it therefore does not exist. Because I looked and it doesn't, and it could not be found. It is therefore completely non-existent. That is falling into an extreme. The balance, the middle way approach, is to recognize that whilst phenomena do not exist in the way they appear, that does not mean that they are completely non-existent. Just because they don't exist in the way they appear does not mean they do not exist at all. 데네게 짐주치데 데네라 마되바지 신노데 요 말레스 아 저거 르파 따발라 마되바 현실에 되네 발루에 따발라 마되네 마되 신도 요 말레스 내가 저대지 디기 셰르바다 아델이야 나 지고 직삼시 용으로 받아 당연히 대지 신도 통으로 받아 대 신도 현실에 되네 아 줄은 나 나주를 따발 때 여발 제자 등한주 통해 신도지 제자 나주를 롤파 뛰고레스 진짜 맞대봐도 요 말이라와 다마도 메나 아니 당한주 파 현다실 조셔베네 미 현다실레베네 대신한주 통해 신도의 통구에 통말했어 단 나주 통해 신도 통구여베네 나주 롤을 뛰어 말 나주 롤 맞대봐지 걸려디어스다 제자 데네자 롤 뛰어봤 발뢰파 다발 뛰어베 뢰파 샤발 뛰어게세디 미뢰 샤발 뛰어바레세디 지금도 와서는 결혼 조사베네 신도의 현다 통화에 디미디션에 미망고지 개담발에게는 개담발 통구로 와서지 나지 고심주체도 제자 신도의 통구도 와 제자 대시 당보 결혼의 뢰파 결혼을 나 결뢰 샤발라 때네 파 다발 때네 신도 능고래 제자 현실에 때네 결혼을 다발라 마되발 신도의 요 말에서디 다다 책임을 결혼 조사베네 결혼 조사도 결혼로 요 말에서 이내 통구도 신도의 내 통구도 결혼을 따발라 되면도 세상에 통구도 와서비 세상 신도한테 그런 죽되고도 시한에 되면도 그런 죽고도 sempre 삼로 연구로 와다. Staying with the tree, because it's easy to understand that we've heard, and hopefully it's very clear, that whilst the tree appears to us as being independent, when we investigate, we quickly recognize it is dependent on a variety of causes as well as labeling by mind. So therefore, it does not exist in the way that it appears, but is empty of existing in the way that it appears. It's empty of existing independently, but is rather dependent. Causes, parts, and labeling by mind. So that's what we've covered. And a doubt may then arise about the dependency on labeling by mind. We're talking about the tree that we ourselves individually are labeling. So what about when we are not perceiving the tree? If we're looking elsewhere or we leave this area, does that tree become non-existent? So maybe it still exists because someone else will see it. But what if no one is looking at that tree? Does it become non-existent? No. It would be strange to say, yes, it does. So therefore, if it doesn't become self-existent, if it's not being looked at, or not being perceived, that would mean then it must be self-existent, because it's now not requiring labeling by mind, but the tree will still be there.
제상 결혼을 통도가로 결혼을 받다고 하는데 그런 원에 줍대요 그래서 제가 신고를 랑군에 줍대요 그래서 제상 결혼 조배네 신고를 랑군에 줍대요서 편이요 그래서 제상 랑군에 마주바 있나 마주 받 통해요 말했어 제상데 랑군에 줍대요 신고를 랑군에 줍바래 랑군에 줍바래 결혼을 받려 마주를 받다고 하는데 니 소리했어 제상 신도세 코를 랑군에 줍바다 랑을 받려 받다봐 니가게 두모 니 소리했어 니가 그랬어 마도 랑용원에 마도 코롱원에 마도 바지 뢰파 짜자 따대바세디 요마 디고 말았지 제 가소리 디고 말했어야지 다 랑지 비기 신동하다 최가리 나가서 나에도 코롱 신지 랑용원에 줍되어레스 마도 뢰파 따바 니가레스 제사 랑원에 줍 코롱 신동하서 빈나와네 코랑원에 줍되바지 요레스 거다디
The Madhyamaka school, the Middle Way school, has their two divisions. The Svatantika Madhyamaka. They will agree the tree requires labeling by mind. But when you're not looking at that tree, it doesn't now become non-existent. It still exists without it being labeled. How so? Because that tree exists inherently. Or to translate that differently, it exists by way of its own nature. Essence. Therefore, it can exist without being labeled. Because if something required labeling in order to exist, it would need to be constantly labeled. And what is constantly labeled? So therefore, whilst phenomena do require labeling, in addition, so there are two criteria, they also exist by way of their own nature.
제가 데니기 제바체도 샘제비 가르송고르스네 제가 신동한 디두스데 그 맞다 맞제반은 가서 자상 개념도 통하기 신동한 지금 아주 미니 숨지 답변에 통고를 당해 통하지 요래스 맞제바 맞제바는 다 제바 제뒤갑라 제자도 시대 신동도 간디스 능도 나한 그나 신도 간디스 제바는 소 제바는 진짜 내 통하게 신도도 결혼 통고 말에 결혼 통하게 신도도 내 통고 말했어. 진짜 미소스라는 통하게 신도를 요래서. 진짜 내 통하게 두시 제바지네 신도도 편이 되어봐나지 되어베 민나로 여봐 가르쳐를 대신에 제바이나 나의 신도도 말한 게 셈이 되네 줍디 버시리스. 진짜 딩이랑 통고마도 현다 수지 통고 말했어 그래. 진짜다 미 현다 지금 통화디야 니네 코로나랑 통마다 현다 통고 말이지. 제가 니네자 아니 니네기 제바제나 마다 마제바 있는 아주 차상기 투모도 통통하게 신도지 요래스. 제바는 소소라랑이 투모 많이 통하게 신도를 마도 투모 통하게 신도라고 말해서 요 말했어. 니 최담제 셈게 단위 점래 해야지 셈점비 최담제 셈게 단위 점래 셈경고 자 단위 점래 중국어로 제가 셈점비 두시네다 제가 데니기 제바지도 갑라 데니 제바지도 데니 고 탱유비게 따와 Rangyubi Tawa, and Semja Horo Tawa, Diniki Tawa Haka Ligorba. Shedamchi, Semji Danism said, Semji Danism in Semji Danism, Semji Mozam race, Semji Danis, Semda Moji race or that. Semji Mori, Semda Semji Moj, Trupti Bajmato, Semji Mole, Loso, Dinigi, Chiro, when you droop to get Chisa, Shindo Choma, Chiro, don't do your mother said this or Semji Mole, Loso. Oh, the Jebachi to couple of Jebachi to Simju more is Simjir more chaders.
When Buddha was teaching the Dharma, he taught in accordance with the specific predispositions of beings. So there were different tenets were taught. The Chittamatrans, they have a different presentation coming from the teachings of the Buddha, where they say, when we all as a group, with 2 or 3 or however many of us, look at a tree, without investigating, we all in common see a tree. But when we investigate, we are not seeing the same tree or a tree in common, but rather when we investigate, we recognize that the tree we perceive is uncommon. So without investigation, the tree, we see a common tree, a tree that's common to all of us. When we do investigate, we see an uncommon tree, our own unique tree. And why is that? Because the perception of that tree is dependent on our own mind. And therefore, when we investigate, when we look closely, we'll recognize or understand that we are perceiving a unique tree, our own tree. And this indicates that the object, in this case the tree, is in the very nature of the mind. It is no different from the mind. So this is the understanding of the Chittamatrans. So here we see that in the teachings of the Buddha, in the Buddhists, divided into the varying Buddhist tenets, how they are differing presentations.
Tsendik Viye Shidu Andu Sukdiki, Nadu Pelangazuki, Yama, that's Nandu Seral, Tsendik Lobsang Channel, Tsendik Yendiki, Patun Dukabla. Nazuki, Pene, Duschene, Jasharova, Jadam Disu Yorvada. Penigi, Shogachi Duschetun, the Penipri Shoganala Karatungusin, Jadam de Kojulo de Tungua, Shoganaldi Shagua. Then Nazu Dusharova, Piggy Shoganala Kojulo in Tungua. Jeza Nanzule Sukti Shardu Didua Del Shagua Sukti. Nanzu told the Jadam Dus Kotungur de. De shaya dele kojulo de shartu chi. Chesang anzu mi de shartu kabla panichala de kojulo de thonde chi anzu ya pani mi gi thonde kal pa khodu thonde ga chi. Chesang di sharta di na thonda ni di midun ba de chai do.
When I was studying in Sarah, we had regular science classes, and there what was shown to us is how if you take a flask and you perceive it in a mirror, and you then pour from the flask into water, what then is happening in your brain? Because from what you are perceiving, everything seems upright and as it is in the world. But actually, at the back of the brain, the perception is inverted. And this too then shows that the way phenomena appear is different from how they exist.
And at
that point we can then stop for this morning. If you have some questions, then there's time, and please do ask. Tsepo?
Just the last sentence in the bigger paragraph that we've just done in this session. I can understand how dependent arising is used as conventional truth, but I don't really understand how emptiness is viewed as a conventional truth in some way of explaining It says, thus there is even an explanation that emptiness can be viewed as conventional truth. So I don't see how it's saying that from the previous thing. They're dependent arising, sure, but not. I have trouble with emptiness.
Den igen, altså kender de kolde lokmanjong i kon de kolde jøyere. De til de nanglara, til du sempre kon jøyere. Jeg kender danda bare de sit med generelt med kon de jøyere. Churchen du songway rangi kunzop dempa shepa yang jø. Den ne dokpa karide. Dempa dropa dan kunzop de draw jøring de hakuzong ni Tompeni dundan deba de kan des kunzop chage de. Indi ja, ene na hakamachong.
네, kunzu di kunzu re sungo omare. 가시기 디 kunzu re 춘이 딩이 kunzu re 세 sungo re sun가 요래서 그러다. 가시기 디 sungo re. 가르스네 동반이 코롱의 미체 코롱 템버 주머르 거랑원이 주머르 제바치디 코롱 매가 차르제 네 코 동반이 이용으로 지사 디니자 동반이디 동이체 코롱 동반이 데라 되네 동반이디 군습 차르 가선 제도 제바치비로 동반이 또 로디원을 매가 차르와 지사 로디원을 군습 차르 그래서 지사 디니자 데니기 매가 차르 그래 지사 디니자 동반이를 때네 동반이 군습세야디 어두시네 순간 요래서 그래 말에 지단에 데니게 라마 또 베게 라마 캐바지던데 순간 요래서 그래
So example
텐주바다디 좀 되기 쉬워 마지다다 데니게 캐바하시 데니 군습이 돈이 군습세네 순고래 지 순고의 금쟁 디가rellam나 네고 동방 코로나 제바치디 동반인디 롱어를 데라 동반이 돈이 레도 동반이 코로 매바 차르 거로 지사 군주비 최대 동무이도 롱어 군주비 최가 하는 거 맞지나디 디응을 만나와서 군주비야디 근데 동반이 군주비야디 도시네 디인자 김전 될때 동반이 군주비야디 순간 요래스
I don't repeat Seppel's question, but a question comes from the last line in this paragraph that we're looking at. Thus, there is an explanation that emptiness can be viewed as a conventional truth. So, His Holiness here is addressing the presentation that some Tibetan masters make. So, not something from tenets, but a way of explaining that some Tibetan masters make. That when emptiness is realized, the ultimate truth is realized, when that then is investigated, because it now is the object of investigation, it becomes a conventional truth when it is investigated. So this then is the presentation that some Tibetan masters make. So that is what His Holiness is pointing to here. Okay.
So in the Prasangika, is it saying that phenomena only exist if there is a mind perceiving them? And so if that perceiving mind wasn't there, then the object would not exist? Part one. For the sake of argument, what is the difference between saying that imputation by mind is the only way that phenomena can exist, as opposed to imputation by mind is the only way that we can know something exists? And if it's the former, are you saying that all phenomena only exist in relation to other phenomena? So that all phenomena can only exist relatively?
Great question. So I'll repeat all three, and you stop me immediately when I get it wrong, okay? Are Prasangika saying that a phenomena only exists if it is perceived by a mind? And if there is no perceiving mind, then the object does not exist. Okay? Then if phenomena, and then by saying that phenomena are merely labeled by mind, or merely imputed by mind, does that mean that this is the only way they can exist? Or is it saying that this is the only way we can know something? Yeah. So would that have the implication that something could be existing but unknown? Yeah. Okay. Good. So therefore, does this mean that all phenomena only exist in relation to other phenomena? Or in other words, do all phenomena only exist dependently? Or relatively. So, and then just to say, the Tibetan term for dependency is also translated as relatively or in relation to. So, yeah, okay, good. Okay, thank you.
le ta ne yubi. Yomane. Yumebere. Le.
So I'm rather going to answer them one at a time, because then the memory is more reliable. The first question, so Prasangika is saying that a phenomenon can only exist if it is labeled or imputed or designated by mind, and if it is not so, it does not exist. Yes, they are saying that.
Yobaine lu injimichi pata hore se chichi. Adire da adi jik yoba jing hansuki hamogo lu pa mata wa ji yore se jorwa. Di nganzu shatu go mare. 지게 뢰파 요래 라비오도 요래 랍데 여바다 하고 거와 수하고 로지가 하고 거와 나서 하면 거는 이니 셴바 하고 게데 진짜 셴바도 그런 셴바디 그 따로 와다 근데 인지비 따는 가서 뢰 따고 말 수뢰 따베네도 뢰파 샤베네 베네 가서 그 샤베나 장유 셴바는 그 샤베나다 상예 샤베나 다 미치 같이 로지기 파 샤네 연마 로 가야게 마샤바 파 마샤바라
Then to the second question, in the context of things being merely labeled by mind, then what is the difference in saying that something can only exist if it's labeled by mind, or could it not be that something can only be known if it's labeled by mind? And therefore, if it's not labeled by mind, it is unknown but can still exist. Something cannot exist if it's not labeled by mind. It has to be labeled by mind, but that mind doesn't necessarily have to be our own. It needs, though, to be labeled by a mind, someone else, a bodhisattva, a Buddha, but it needs to be designated, imputed, labeled by mind. So it has, for it to exist, it needs to be known. It needs to be realized by a consciousness, by a mind. You could maybe say someone's mind. Doesn't need to be us. Okay.
yoba chasa chile chik tingre besde yoba kanishine shen chile tugore ma de chile chik tesde ya bine shingdona chik derwa je dendi chida yoba I kanish yoba ine koron tense chi yorda ha chik chile tingo pa yana ngazu lue pa sha pa la tyoba han ji shan da chi tyoba inji bi tingo chi shan la tyne yena ma do shan la ma tyoba yong sa yom da.
Everything that exists depends relative to other phenomena, or in dependence on other phenomena, and I forget the third term you used. So all phenomena exist dependently. And the dependency can be in different ways, but they will be dependent. All will be dependent on imputation by mind. Many are also dependent on causes and conditions, and many are dependent on parts. So, and the different way to express this is also as mutually dependent. But what is common to these different expressions will be everything that exists is dependent. Or it's relative to something else, has a relationship to something else. Without being dependent, it cannot exist. And there's a question forming.
I'm just trying to know what that is. So I understand, I think, that all phenomena exist dependent on something else. It could be dependent on parts, it could be dependent on causes and conditions. But does that necessarily mean that it can only exist dependent on other phenomena? Or on other, I think I'm answering my own question.
Yeah, because within that other phenomena, we would include a consciousness, perceiving it, labeling it.
Yeah.
So yes. Yes. Okay?
Thank you.
Simple?
Can I just say something about the question? Because I think, I don't think it happens in the Tibetan culture, because I think from our culture, the idea of object is that some objects have been known, but there's a whole lot of objects that are still to be discovered by science. So it's sort of almost like we're given that paradigm.
Yeah.
And I think that's very different to the definition of an object being an object of knowledge. So the paradigm has to change for us, otherwise it's a big blockage. So again, that just agrees with that assertion. So an object is an object of knowledge, something that is known, not necessarily by ourselves. Okay, thank you.
I just had a question. We're talking about Buddha potential, Buddha lineage. So in our tradition, we talk about Buddha potential, but some other tradition, they say that we are already Buddhas. That sounds like, but we just haven't recognized it yet. When that's being said, it sounds to me like, oh, there's like soul or self that, you know, you just sit there and try to find it and you'll kind of uncover it and recognize it. So it seems like, oh, we don't need to create all the causes and conditions to become Buddha, you know, just find it there. How do they kind of explain it? And what does it mean by other traditions? Like, which tradition is it? Is it other tenet systems or is it other traditions within Prasangika?
In our tradition, and Genla said it, I don't think I did, in our Geluk tradition, we talk about Buddha potential, or usually translated as Buddha lineage, whereas in other traditions, it is said, it is expressed in a different way. The meaning is the same, the expression differs, which is that we are already enlightened, it is obscured and therefore unrecognized. So when I hear that, it sounds like, well, then the work is already done. I just need to kind of look for that soul, wait for it to happen, and the magic will happen. So I appreciate that is not the case. So how do these other traditions, how do they explain this? And then can specify what is meant by other traditions. Okay. And just to say, if some people need to go because we've been here a while, if you need the loo or whatever, please feel free to go.
Rangshe sanje yin le sanje yue se ho sanje yue se de. Sanje nga sanje yin le go ma sanje yue se ho su le yue se de semge rangshin yue sa wa di kolong ani yue wa za semge rang semge rang su ya sanje yue se di su ho. Pe ji de nimi yu chu yu cha sa na su yu na yin ka ji na le de yue se de de ke ma su ke la sanje yore es. Yine da sanje yue na nga su 다 상계 냠는 제고 민도아 사베게 삼림으로 제사디 요르데 디 뇨모베 징되어라 로버게 뇨모베 징되어라 하사셰바나 이제 뇨모베 징되어라 제사 뇨모베 짜마서 고레스 제상아저 곰냠네 제와 디레스 뇨모베 짜마서 사바나 디네가저 상경원에 체고레스 제상아 주길에 셈게 라시 외사와 디 요르데 상계디 된나베 상계디 가 주길에 요르데 이네 디 뇨모베 차사 징되제卷기 찾아 징되어 버려서 지사디 상계기卷기지 파卷상무서 차버려서 지사 상계 찾아 당아 주길라 뇨모바 디파 게는 뇨모바 디메와 파 징되게 뇨모바 디메 장무서 바나 고 장마 차로 그래 지사 상경원에 차기래서 도시고 지사 데디 당아 주기 나 주기 데기루베 소나지 셈게 장시 외사와디 요레데 디 아저 상기 인식이요 마당한 주기다 상기 인라고 말해 돈나베 가서 냥티 레세 민다고 말해 상기 인라고 말해 제가 아주기라 상기 유라고 말해 제가데 데니기 라신디 뇽모베 징되어 징바래 디마 장마 쇠는 아주 상기고 마 토야래 제가 로브고 뇽모바 세고바디 아주 징바래 이나다 돈나베기 셈게 라시 외사와 등 아주기라 여바 인자 라신이 nga 주길라 상기도 요래 해야지 근데 저게 도스는 수마 요래 해야지 nga 주기 길루비네 라신이 냥디에서 데니시 요르마도 라신이 상기 요래 해야 돼 이길라 상기 요래 해야 직디 배시단 거 말해야지
Within Tibetan Buddhism, there are the 4 schools of Tibetan Buddhism, and some of those schools have a multitude of subdivisions. So within some of the Nyingma traditions, they describe the Buddha nature in this way, that we have the Buddha nature, we have the I think they call it Rigpa, but we would call it clear light mind. We have the ultimate clear light mind within us. It is just covered, obscured. So the nature of our mind is no different from that of the Buddhas. But it's covered, it's obscured. So this is something we have, rather than we are Buddhas, but this is something that we have. So now this is saying it in a way that's very similar.
It's not we are Buddhas, but we are in the nature of the mind Buddhas.
The nature of our mind, it's difficult because in English I've heard many times we are Buddhas. But Genla is not saying this. But Genla is saying we have this, right? So he's saying Yopa rather than Yinpa. But in English I've heard many times we are Yinpa. But Genla is saying this can't be Yopa. We have. So we have this, but it's obscured. But then in terms of the techniques, again, different traditions emphasize different things, but it boils down to the same point. For the ultimate clear light mind, it's in the Geluk language, to manifest, to manifest, to arise in as the four bodies of the Buddha, one needs to purify all those stains and obscurations, which is done also through the process of accumulation. So the other traditions, the Nyingma tradition, would certainly talk about the need to purify the stains and through accumulating virtuous minds, and in this way, one would realize the nature of the mind.
You know, the ultimate clear light mind, right? Our nature and Buddha's nature is the same, but ultimate clear light mind isn't Buddhahood, right? Why do we state it as though we are Buddhas? I don't know, it just sounds
Sure.
like you don't need to create the causes and conditions.
Sure.
But that's kind of but maybe it's a difference, like you said, that the meaning of have and is.
So in essence, it is a different way to express the same thing. There's not a difference in philosophy, but in meaning, there is a difference in expression. So again, let's very explicitly use, we have this, but certainly what I've read and what I've heard in oral teachings is. We have, yeah? We are. But the meaning is not that we are already done, others the work could be done. But when they talk about recognizing the nature of the mind, this is done through clearing away those obscurations, through purification and accumulation. Okay? Different expression, but a bit confusing. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.